Welcome to Master of Science with host Professor James McCanney. The good professor's career spans 50 years as a university teacher, scientist, and engineer. Each week, he will explore the rapidly changing world of science as many long-held theories are crumbling under the weight of new data. He will cover the fields of geology, archaeology, meteorology, oceanography, space science, astronomy, cosmology, biological evolution, virology, energy, mathematics, and more. So please welcome the host of Master of Science, James McCanney.
Good evening, everybody. Episode 83 in the ongoing series. Tonight is a very interesting night because something I've been talking about, it looks like all of this is coming to fruition. And I'm going to start off by making mention about the Iran war, or whatever you call it. It is, I've seen there's endless amount of talking and this analysis and that analysis on both sides, and oh my goodness. But nobody is even close to the mark of what's really going on. And it's very simple. It's about banking. It's about banking. And this was all supposed to happen in June. But a little thing called 3i Atlas is moving it up, and it's being pushed in the inside of the intel communities. For space defense, there are so many programs that are going on in the background related to space defense. But it has the whole issue with Iran is they have to tighten up the global banking system to bring in the new one world government. That's what's going on. And it's nothing makes sense if you think about, I've seen analysis of how many rockets Iran has and drones and how costly it is for the United States to shoot up $1 million anti-ballistic rockets and sometimes $2 or $3 million to shoot down a $35,000 drone that can come in and make a little hole in the middle of a street, and basically the same kind of terror that the V-1 rockets caused in England in World War II. But the whole issue here, it's, you can analyze all this back and forth and what U.S. bases were hit, and, and really they got the U.S. personnel out of there probably right away. Because, you have to understand that the U.S. does not need local bases. They don't need local bases. They have worldwide capability from North Dakota. So anyway, but see, none of that matters. That's what I'm saying. All this chatter back and forth is pointless because it's simply about bringing Iran under the World Bank. And until they actually get in there and make that happen, regime change, they call it, that's kind of like that's like kind of a name they put on it. In other words, get under the banking umbrella. That's what it's all about. Okay, so I'm not going to say any more about that. But coupled with that is the disappearance of scientists who have a long history of being in those skunk work operations, not the least of which is a guy named William McCasland. And so he was the head of Lockheed Martin, of Skunk Works, of the various space-related programs, astronaut training programs. So this guy was all over the board. So he walks out of his house the other day and disappears. So they have a manhunt on. I don't know if they've found him yet. But at any rate, very strange circumstances, and that's all I'm going to say because there are other people reporting on that, and I don't have any real inside information other than what you might see on the evening news. But the murder of physicists dealing with like fusion type of energy and other related topics. It's just very strange, and so I'm not going to go into detail on that. But the end result here is that they are ushering in right now as I'm speaking here, the one world government. I listened to a guy named Tucker Carlson, and Tucker was going up to try and convince President Trump not to invade Iran. And of course, he was basing it on rational beliefs and thinking. And what is this going to do to America? Is making America weaker? Well, all of these things aside, that has nothing to do with the fact that Iran is a big, major economic power because of its oil. And the oil industry internationally has been crippled just because oil, the movement of oil, the infrastructure to move oil on a daily basis, the United States alone uses around probably upwards of 350 million gallons of gasoline per day. Most people don't have a concept of how much that is. And to move that in the infrastructure that's necessary to, and that doesn't count diesel. Diesel is about 2/3 of that, maybe 100 or maybe about half of that, 160 million gallons per day, and that's what moves trains and trucks and heavy lift machinery. So the price of oil is, I mean, none of this is good economically if you look at it from, excuse me, if you look at it from a point of view of economics or any other viewpoint, I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. The only way it makes sense is if you understand it's about bringing Iran into the banking empire. And that is essential to bring in the one world government. And the way they're doing it is with 3-eye atlas. So that's the point that comes back to science and the behavior of comets. And so once again, that would not be possible without the dirty snowball fake comet model. Because now I saw another article where Avi Loeb is asking for funding to organize his global efforts to defend the planet against aliens. In other words, put out a 3-dimensional space shield that would be able to fight any foe that comes our way from out there. And this would be the primary objective, the very first one, would be looking for objects like 3-eye atlas, which is only the third interstellar object ever to be determined as interstellar. And a lot of other comets actually are interstellar, but by the time they get into the region of maybe Saturn to Jupiter or the inner solar system, by the time they get there, they have already lost energy, and it looks like they're coming from a region called the Oort cloud. I call it the Oort effect. And so Oort was this astronomer, and early in the days of telescope astronomy where they were really documenting and cataloging. And they noticed that the outer rim, when you look at the elliptical orbits of comets, they seem to have their farthest point from the sun out in a certain region. So they said, oh, these comets must come from this region. And that's a valid analysis. That's a valid observation. But that's not really what was going on. What happens with the plasma discharge comet model is when these comets first come in, even though they're coming at hypervelocity, they slow down because that initial tail drag. They hit the solar capacitor. They get a jolt out in the Kuiper belts where we don't see them. They get a jolt of tail drag, and it slows them down. So it's pretty rare. It's kind of like a filtering mechanism for the entire solar system, where objects come in much faster, but by the time we see them, they're already slowed down. because of what I call the Oort effect. So Oort made a good observation, and then they blamed it, or because they had to support this dirty snowball comet model. They said, oh, when the solar system was forming, allegedly 4.5 billion years ago, which is a fairy tale in itself, then all of this ice formed way out there, and occasionally they say a rogue star comes by, perturbs millions of these objects, and some come flying into the solar system, and that's where and they tend to come from a certain spot where that object came by, and so it throws them into the inner solar system. A somewhat likely story based on the dirty snowball comet model. But the Oort effect is, in fact, what I'm telling you, that it's the slowing down of almost any object, even though they're hypervelocity on hyperbolic orbits that come in and would leave the solar system normally, just pass through, and they would not be captured in general unless they got near Jupiter or near Saturn, etc., one of the big planets. And then this twin star system effect of capturing them would take place, and they would join the family of Jupiter comets or family of Saturn comets or family of Uranus comets, etc. Earth has its own set of family of comets, very minor one compared to Jupiter. But, okay, so, but the end result is right now they are ushering in the new one world government. And so whoever is in positions of leadership, they're being directed, and they probably don't understand why they're being directed to do things like, in terms of support. For example, they took a vote in Congress, whether they support this war or not. And remember, Congress has the only entity in the United States that has the ability to wage war, to say, okay, we're going to go war. And then the president takes over, and he's commander-in-chief, and he commands the armed forces. But it has to be Congress. And, of course, that has gone by the wayside since time we can't even remember, where the last time that Congress actually voted in a war. And we've had dozens, if not hundreds, of wars over the past many, many decades that were simply initiated by the president. Boom, hey, we're going to have a war. We're going to go over there. It's called policing action, or all kinds of different interesting names. But when you start shooting bullets and live ammunition, that's a war, buddy. But without congressional approval. But there again, it has little, if anything, to do with standard procedure. It's the fact that Iran was they got rid of Libya, Gaddafi, and a lot of other people that were standing in the way of the one world banking system, which is essential to the one world government. Okay, so enough of that. But as you watch the milieu of data and analysis and controversy and people discussing what's the whole Iran war and what will happen to the future, etc., there's only one answer. It's about banking. Okay, in the news, really not in the news, non-news I should call it, is Leina Dreams. Remember her? I talked about her many weeks ago. She was, right from the beginning, 3i Atlas, she had access to 3 pretty good-sized telescopes. She had a half-meter telescope in Chile. She had access to other telescopes, other minor professional quality telescopes. But to see comets, you really don't need a big light-gathering telescope. You just need a relatively decent telescope with a spectrometer. And so a number of weeks ago, I said Leina has stopped posting. She took some interesting data relative to 3i Atlas with her spectrometer, and doggone, all of a sudden her spectrometer broke. It's not like you can't just order one in a day from some astronomical house. They're easy to find. Believe me, I got a few here I could send her. It's not a big ticket item. It's not hard to find. But hers broke and she just couldn't fix it. Now, isn't that special? And so then she went into the some public databases that come out of some of the professional scopes and started looking at things, but really didn't come up with anything. But the point being that amateurs and people with semi-amateur status like her, and I don't know if that's really her name, that's what she posts under, but and it's Leina Dreams, just like at night when you go to sleep, dreams. And that's maybe that's her stage name. But just couldn't produce any data. But the point is that all amateur contributions regarding 3i Atlas have just disappeared. Avi Loeb comes out occasionally with some interesting new information that he got from, say, a tranche, a release of data. And there's some other places also that are having very good information relative to 3i Atlas. But once again, they really don't understand what they're looking at. That this is a comet, and it's not a spaceship. It's not a alien technology. It's simply a comet doing what a fast, high-velocity comet should do. Because the higher velocity, it breaks down the solar capacitor to a higher degree than a comet moving slowly. Let's just go, in physics sometimes you do things, you go to the extreme. And so let's go down to a comet moving at zero velocity. So a comet comes in, let's just pretend it just got some brakes, it stops, and is just sitting there. Okay, what's going to happen? It's going to accumulate charge based on that electrical potential in outer space because it's in the solar capacitor. And so it's just going to stop having any activity. Now let's make it go a little faster. On an elliptical orbit where it's cutting in the gradient of the field lines. The gradient of the field lines is basically like saying the change in the intensity of the field, and that is because the sun is the center of the capacitor, and then the electric field is radially outward, so it gets less and less as you get farther out. And the other side of the capacitor is in the Kuiper belt, which is a region of dust and gas held back by solar wind pressure, and that's where a lot of comets are forming planets out there. That's where all those planets are coming from. But okay, so in between the Kuiper belt, what I call the nebular ion cloud, and the sun, you have a non-uniform electric field. So as you get closer, the potential changes. So if you move faster, the faster you move, the faster you cut the gradient field lines, the change in the electrical potential, and the greater the electrical discharge. Okay, and that happens in the atmosphere, for example. I could go on and on about giving different examples. But the end result is that 3i Atlas came in really, really fast. And so it was discharging the solar capacitor to a much higher degree than a normal comet, which was moving relatively slowly. Okay. So, given that, 3i Atlas was acting much differently. And of course, the tail material is coming in towards the comet nucleus by electrical forces. That's what this diagram is all about. And you see it here too. Hale-Bopp is a great example where this was a picture taken with a Swan filter, which showed triply ionized oxygen, singly ionized hydrogen, in other words, very highly ionized water. Okay, so the end result is 3i Atlas is just acting like a normal comet, but with a hypervelocity movement relative to the gradient of the solar electric field. Okay. I've talked about the missing guy. Let me see, looking at my notes here. Okay, I talked about Avi Loeb. Okay, and I talked about, the Iran and the banking. Those are my initial notes. Okay, now we're going to turn to tornadoes. Oh my goodness. This last week, now, there again, I have to laugh at the weathermen. It's like tornadoes just, oh my goodness, there just was a tornado. In physics, stuff just doesn't happen. There has to be a cause, there has to be an energy source, there has to be something that maintains that tornado. And you're seeing more and more good photography. People are out chasing these storms. They're crazy, but they get some amazing footage. And what you typically see, though, is a tornado with a lot of electricity around it, a lot of lightning. There was once a guy who a tornado went right over him, and he was able to look up into the funnel cloud, and he said it was all just lightning. Yeah, that's because it's the manifestation of the vertical electric field, a discharge. And you see it when it starts to spin, what's going on? That the electric current is ionizing the air near the ground. And as it starts to pull up, you can see this all happening. As it starts to pull up, it starts to twist. That's the Coriolis force. And then once the cloud that's above it starts connecting into the vertical electric field, and that current flows, then that starts the rotation faster and faster, and it's like a vacuum cleaner. And they say that's also the thing if you're in a house, for example, and a tornado is coming, you leave the windows open. You leave the windows open because what happens in a tornado is there's a vacuum. And what happens if you have the windows closed, the house explodes. If the windows are closed, the house has more pressure inside. It's dealing with literally a vacuum outside, a pretty good high vacuum. And so the house just explodes, blows the roof off. But if you leave the doors and windows open, then it relieves the pressure, and you might have some damage on your doors or windows, but it doesn't blow the whole house apart. Okay, so a lot of tornadoes. The one in Michigan, the deadliest tornado in a long time, but where is the energy coming from? Now, remember, 3i Atlas and Jupiter are still interacting with the sun. So the sun is, and they're not interacting anymore directly with Earth, but the sun is interacting via its solar wind with planet Earth, and that's where the energy source is that is driving these. I mean, here we are in March. This is not Tornado Alley. It's not Tornado Month. February can have some, but the March is not well known for late winter for tornadoes. Maybe if you live in Oklahoma, they would be starting, but they're typically run through the peak of the season in August with the warmest weather, and that's when you get the humidity that drives the cumulonimbus clouds, which go way up, and then they're connecting into the vertical electric field. Also, there have been a lot of videos of people catching the sprites above clouds where they see the lightning coming out of the bottom of clouds, and they must be out in the desert where it's really clear and you can see off in the distance these clouds forming, and then the discharge of the vertical electric field, and you see the sprites above that are literally coming from outer space. And notice that the sprites are red. Electrons. Those are the electrons up in the upper atmosphere as part of this discharge. And so the current is actually the ionized material at the troposphere, where we live, moving up, and then the electrons coming down. So they're coming down into the atmosphere, and you see this kind of a ring-shaped, like kind of a ring-shaped disk, and then from the center drops down the electron current. Okay, so tornadoes in the news. Wow. And I trust these people are helping out in these different regions that have had excessive tornadoes. Okay, now jumping into what I would consider the main science topic tonight, coal. I've talked about coal before. I have a piece here on my desk. I've shown this on the show before. Just to take a look at that. There we go. See if I can get that into focus. Now, this is a piece of coal that just fell off a coal train. And I picked it up, a couple of pieces of this. But you see, it is... see if I can get a good shot of light on there. Okay, this is a fossil. It's basically layers and layers. And I'll hold it up sideways also so you can see it. So this is like shale. If you took a screwdriver or a knife and put it up sideways here, and you could split this apart. So this is coal that's locked in shale. So when they process coal, what they're trying to do is get the sand and non-burnables out of there so that you end up with pure burnable carbon. But look at now the story, the official story of coal is that there were fern forests, and the fern forests died, or the ferns died and built up, and then created this coal. Well, if that's what happened, then how did these fossilized fern leaves get locked into this piece of coal? And of course, it doesn't make any sense, like almost everything else. When they talk about, for example, diamonds, here's a good example. They talk about diamonds forming under huge pressure underground. Well, gee, that sounds like reasonable belief. But if diamond is the hardest thing, then how did softer rock around the diamond compress it to become a diamond? How did that work? You can't take something softer and like taking a pillow and pulling it up against your head and expecting to put a lot of pressure on your head. That's why you have a pillow, so you equalize the pressure. But you cannot make something harder with something softer. It's just the way it is. Okay, so the idea that diamonds are made deep in the earth and then somehow the volcanic movement brings them up to the surface and that's where you find them. Well, that's a good idea, but what really happened is they formed in outer space when Earth was acting as a comet and building up when it was its planetary development stage as a comet. And the diamonds form because you have electrons coming from the sun in the discharge of the solar capacitor, and then you have free carbon in outer space, and that's what forms the diamond. And it's the same process, by the way, that you do in a laboratory when they make artificial diamonds. So the interesting thing, however, in coal beds is they will find all kinds of things. In fact, they found actually remnants of human beings. So here's actually how coal forms. And you can see this, for example, but just back to what happens. Look at the coal beds. Pick up a map, search for the coal beds of Pennsylvania, for example. You'll find it on the eastern flank of the Appalachian Mountains that come in to Pennsylvania. Or if you look at, say the Appalachian Mountains coal fields, the eastern side is where these massive, huge amounts of coal are found in big deposits. Well, what happened was a huge tsunami came across the ocean, across what we call the Atlantic Ocean, scooped up all of this material and piled it up against the side of a mountain, where eventually, because of the weight, the water was compressed out of there, and you're left with this, layers and layers of, let me see if this side, you can see it. This is the bottom side of what you were looking at before. And here's the top side. That much has a much better. But you see the entire plant. It didn't rot and become coal. In fact, if that were the case, you could take just dirt and compress it and make coal. And that's not the way it works. There's like peat. If you look in Ireland, for example, they have peat, and what that is that's kind of a form of coal where they dry it out is a special shovel they dig, and that's what they heat their houses with. But it's not really coal. Coal is compressed. And a lot of times in coal you'll find oil, vast amounts of oil. That's some of the rich deposits of oil in the world come from coal beds. And that's called dirty coal. And it burns much hotter because it has the oil in it. Okay, so at any rate, very important to understand that the real source of coal is from tsunamis. Well, where do the tsunamis come from? The tsunamis come from very large celestial objects coming near Earth and setting up a gravitational wave, which creates the tsunami. And the tsunami is a one-time wave. It comes in just like a bulldozer, scoops up all of this plant material, slams it against the side of a mountain, where later it becomes coal. Now, this very thing happened, when was it, a number of, maybe 15, 20 years ago now. There was a very large landslide and volcanic activity off of Sumatra from I believe, the Strait of Sunda. And anyway, there was a large volcano, a large tsunami that was generated that moved all the way across. It came into India, killed a lot of people. It went, many, many miles inland. But then that wave continued through the southern Indian Ocean and then hit the east coast of island of, or the little, it's like a mini continent of Madagascar. And so it took all of this plant material and piled it up. And you can, if you want, you can go to Madagascar and see that. That someday will be a coal bed as the water is compressed out, and that will be dry coal because there was no oil associated with it. The wet coal, or the dirty coal, or the high octane coal, as you might call it, came from a tsunami that was generated by a passing comet that had a large quantity of hydrocarbons in the tail. And so there was a pollution event. The hydrocarbons came from the tail of the comet, and that's where dirty coal comes from. That's the difference between clean coal and dirty coal. Clean coal came from just a tsunami without any related effects, and dirty coal comes from a tsunami related to a comet which dumps hydrocarbons into Earth's atmosphere and saturates the coal with oil. So literally oil, or the tar fields. The tar fields, the Orinoco tar fields in Venezuela, or the sand tar that's up in Canada and Alberta. That's where that oil came from, is from large passing comets. Okay, now I just explained to you what really goes on, what really causes coal fields. And here's an article. It's Smithsonian Mag. So that's the website, www.smithsonianmag, all one string, .com/history/the world's largest fossil wilderness 307-45943. So if you look that up, you will find this article online that tries to tell you, and is so bizarre. So bizarre. Everything that comes out of standard textbooks, standard science, the Smithsonian, or anything government related or government funded is so wrong and backwards and goofy. But I'm going to tell you what they say is the real cause, their version of what causes coal fields. And so they were looking at this one specific one where it has a tremendous amount of fossilized, all types of fossils. Not only fern forests, etc., but extensive other types of fossilized material and plant life and animal life buried in this, and by the way, the deepest coal mine is about a mile down. You have to go a mile down in ground where they're getting the coal out. Well, how did the fern forest grow down there? Excuse me, but it's laughable. In the way that happened is because the Earth has been building up. I'm sure that if we were lucky enough and dug in the right place, we could go down a mile and find old potentially human civilizations that were there, who knows, they say millions of years ago. They don't know. History is so convoluted, they have no idea how old things are. But anyway, what they're saying in the Smithsonian article is that a localized earthquake caused the fern forest to fall down and become fossilized. That's the whole explanation. But wait a minute, Batman and Robin, Boy Wonder Robin, as they say. The coal fields, and I want you to do this, go and look, pull up a map and look for the Appalachian coal fields, or look for other coal fields around the world. And what you'll find is that to imagine that somehow there were earthquakes in all of these places that at one single point, it doesn't explain the coal field that's hundreds, if not in some cases thousands of feet deep. There's a coal mine in Russia. It's the biggest coal mine in the world. It's open pit. And it's just this giant hole in the ground where they've been digging coal for literally a century or probably more. But to imagine that somehow a localized earthquake caused this, no. That would be, here's the scenario that they want you to believe, that the fern forest is growing, and in a normal world, the ferns would grow, they would fall over, they would decay into dirt, basically dirt. And compressed dirt does not form coal, I'm sorry, with the leaves embedded layer after layer after layer. And that's the point. When I showed you this piece of coal a little while ago, that's the way all the coal is. I don't care where in the coal mine or in the coal pit you dig, that's what you're going to find. It's fossilized leaf structures. And it was a big amount of material that came in from a tsunami. And it's like I say, it's like a bulldozer. It just takes all of this plant life and slams it up against the side of a mountain. And now imagine the tsunami that it would take. The Pennsylvania coal fields are, way inland in Pennsylvania. Then that's where Pennsylvania oil came from. Remember the dirty coal, the wet coal in Pennsylvania? That's the Pennzoil. That was one of the original oil sources for the United States. Then Texas, of course, Oklahoma, and other places, then the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, or whatever they call it now, today. But to imagine, now here's the Smithsonian. This would be the staunch, the bastion of all good knowledge, telling you that it was a localized earthquake. Well, that would only account for one little teeny thin layer of fossilized cold material. No, that could not explain 1,000 feet or 500 feet deep of a coal bed where it's all fossilized and layered. No, it just doesn't make any sense at all. But that's what they would expect kids to study, and this is the problem. They're teaching this garbage to kids in school, and kids have to learn this, and then if they write a term paper or something, that's what they have to talk about, and it's absolutely absurd. Okay. Talking about something else that is absurd, and I hate to waste my airtime on this, but the Artemis mission. The Artemis mission is being set back again, and I just love the way they pander, the way they represent, the way they spin this topic. So you got Isaacson, who's under pressure, supposed to be going to the moon this year, 2026. That's the goal. And then in 2028, they want to land a man on the moon. It's, you got your Blue Horizons and you got your SpaceX. and they're supposed to be developing the landing craft that's supposed to land on the moon. I don't think they're going to make it, boys and girls. And the big SLS rocket, Space Launch System rocket, has been moved back to the staging building, unoccupied. And every time they do this, I got to understand, this is a gigantic structure. And when you pressurize it, it stresses everything. And then when you decompress and remove the fuel and move the fuel out of there, it's like a stretching that goes on. And these are not reusable. These are a one-time off rocket system, and so you can't keep filling them with fuel, then unloading them, depressurizing them, trying to find leaks, and then pressurizing them again. This rocket has been pressurized many times. So that's something, and plus all the other systems. These are just far too complex a system. Let's compare it, for example, with the 747. Another major air, or 747, or like the 777s, or the newer big Boeings and the big Airbuses. These are spacecraft or aircraft that have evolved over decades and centuries, literally, at this point, since jet aviation came in. It's not really a century, but we're pushing a century. But certainly aviation, and where, back in the 30s and 40s, they were flying the airships, the flying boats, so to speak, and they'd fly from the West Coast to Hawaii, and they didn't need a landing strip. Very convenient. And they could fly their low-speed, big plane, carry a lot of people, a lot of stuff, a lot of their baggage to go to the Hawaiian Islands. But the point is that air travel has become very, very safe, and the knowledge and how to build things and how to build jet engines, etc., because of just countless, in terms of test hours, let's put it that way, near infinite amount of testing that's gone into the transportation systems of today. But the SLS rocket is the opposite of that. They've only shot a few of these things off, and now they're ceasing to deploy or to build. Was supposed to be a second, I don't know what you call it, like a second stage, so to speak, booster that would go on top of the SLS system to give them more weight capability, things like that. And so they're canceling that, trying to get back to a single design that they can actually manage and put all of their resources. And they're doing this in the tone of, aren't we doing something great here? We're streamlining the process, getting back to the we can do it, the right stuff Apollo days, so to speak. But I think let me just put it this way: if there's a single flaw in a launch, especially if we have people involved, astronauts, live people on board, that's going to be the end of it. See, then what they'll do is, we need a congressional study, and everybody's going to get busy writing reports and what happened, how can we prevent this from happening again. And that's exactly what happened with the shuttle program. These programs are just too big, too expensive. And remember, they were supposed to be going to the moon in 2019. This SLS system was supposed to be alive and well back then. And what was the first launch was how many years ago now? I stopped counting. It does not look good for the moon launch system. And the Chinese are moving ahead. They're claiming that within the next year, they're going to be sending people at least around the moon and coming back. But the United States would be well advised to, and I'm serious about this, take a hard look at it, stop throwing cash at a pig with lipstick, and start over again, literally start over again, in using reliable, well-tested rockets. Having the payload in space is one thing, but um, getting the heavy boost rockets. Look at the Russians. The Russians are still using 1960s rocket technology, kerosene rockets. There's no hydrogen in the Russian rockets, the heavy lift versions of the Russian, and they're launching every day from central Russia. They are launching literally every day, and have been since the 60s, and they're using the same rocket design. Thousands and thousands and thousands of successful launches. They had so much lift capability that they had a auxiliary. It was called the Cosmos. I've had a picture of it. I believe one of my books, I think the weather book, has a picture of it. It might be the Atlantis to Tesla, the Coburn Connection book. One of my books has a picture of the Cosmos, and it's a U2 photograph of the Russians taking one of these things off of a truck. And it's the size of a mid-size delivery van, the bed of a mid-size delivery van. That's about how big it is, called the Cosmos, K with a K, of course, Russian. And it was for 3 cosmonauts. And they had so much lift capability, excess lift capability, that they had dozens and dozens of these launched back in the 60s, while we were still waiting for the Gemini and the Apollo programs to come to fruition. The Russians were launching every day. In the Cosmos series, I had the listing also. It came from a RAND Intel study of keeping track of what the Russians were doing. And they had literally probably hundreds of flights and this, what they would do is they would come back in, they would land in Russia with this, but it was like a shuttle, like a little V-winged shuttle, of which, by the way, the U.S. has a similar landing little kind of 3-man shuttle, which is copied after it. But the Russians had hundreds of flights, and they would come in over the United States and do reconnaissance. And they would then land in Russia, and they would shoot another one up. So they had a bunch of these little Cosmos spacecraft, and hundreds of launches, successful launches, and really never had a major mishap with these things. So very, very reliable up until this day. When the U.S. shuttle was down, the shuttle system, after the Challenger accident, they grounded the shuttle, of course, and they literally hired, after the downfall of the old Soviet Union, they were hurting for money, so the United States actually paid them for many years, even to launch our military, classified military U.S. High top secret payloads being launched from central Russia. It can't get any more bizarre than that. Okay, now for a final 3i Atlas update. What's it doing right now? It's about as quiet as a church mouse out in the field there. There's really no data is really being released of any value. So some of the quagmires still that I've explained, but still being questioned out there, talking about this might be alien technology or something. First of all, the redshift. And that is part of the fact that the comet is, there's a lot of electrical charge relative to the comet, the space charge sheath around the comet nucleus, the Debye shield that is surrounding the comet nucleus that goes way out, probably 10 to 30,000 miles. The discharges, both incoming and outgoing, as the current passes through the comet nucleus here and passes on out, and then the fact that the tail material is coming inbound, and as the tail material comes in on a small comet like this, it's neutralized. The ions are neutralized by the electron cloud. They become neutral, and then they blow out with the solar wind because they're no longer attracted to the electrical force around the comet nucleus. And so you have a lot more material in the tail than you do around the nucleus. And when they measured this at the Philae lander and the Rosetta mission around Comet 67P, the closest they measured water to the nucleus was 10 kilometers away. And that's another thing. The Zurbuchen and the European Space Agency are very quiet. They know full well that comets are not dirty snowballs. And throughout all of this milieu of misinformation about Comet 3I Atlas and everybody talking about it being a dirty, interpreting everything in terms of dirty snowball comet model, the reality is that this is all explainable with the plasma discharge comet model. But of course, they can't do that because then they would not be able to usher in their Space Force and pretend like it's alien technology. Because there's a real rational explanation for it. And of course, nothing makes any sense today, but they need this to bring in the one world government. That's the anyway. But back to the physics of 3I Atlas. The redshift is it's dependent on where the photons are generated. Are they coming through a good deal of the electric field? Now there's going to be less redshift as you get farther out in the Debye shielding. There's going to be more redshift if you get up, for example, if you go up here, up in the tail region of the comet, the anti-sun side, where this current sheet comes back together, there's going to be a lot of negative electric charge there. That's an electron current sheet. And so you will find redshifted species there, chemical species, in that region, but if you go farther out, you're going to get less and less redshifting. Okay. And just to be clear, it's the induced electric dipole redshift that causes the redshift. And this was known about this is nothing new. This was known about in the 1980s and actually before, where people had measured the redshift around comets, and they came up with these anomalous redshifts. Including Halley's Comet. There was a group of astronomers that went to South Americas with good equipment, spectrometers, and they took spectrums of Halley's Comet. And lo and behold, it was redshifted, and they never published the data because they didn't know what it meant. And back then, this is 86, this is how many decades ago? I was explaining that at that time due to the induced electric dipole redshift, but you know, that just shows you how completely lame science is today. Here we are decades, 50 years later, and they still can't figure it out when I'm handing it to them on a golden platter. Okay, the other thing is the non-gravitational forces. They're so-called non-gravitational forces. In other words, the comet is not following a perfect gravitational orbit. And so what's going on is it's slowing down as it comes in before perihelion, before closest approach to the sun. It slows down because the tail is pulling back on it, so it slows it down. And when it's going out, it pulls in the vector is not along the tail because the tail really doesn't point away from the sun, the visible tail. It's pointing in a different direction because this comet is moving very fast, and so the tail is skewed with the anti-sunward direction. But the pull on the tail, the tail drag is basically pulling it out away from the sun, so it accelerates, and they're able to actually measure this now. That's how accurate astronomy is, an incredibly accurate science. And so that's another thing, the electromagnetic phenomena that is going on. And I'll tell you, too, that now that it's at Jupiter and very much in the realm of Jupiter, within its circle of equal force is what I call it. Other people call it the Hill radius. It will be changing into a sulfur dioxide comet, just like the 21 pieces of Schumacher-Levy 9, comet Schumacher-Levy 9. 21 pieces, as they came into Jupiter, they were all water comets, and magically they turned into sulfur dioxide comets. It's on the picture. You can see that famous picture. There's 21 pieces all lined up in a row, sulfur dioxide comets. All of a sudden, and that's because it's getting its tail material from the local environment. And remember that 3I Atlas was showing methane and a lot of the low-chain hydrocarbon elements, molecules in the tail a couple weeks ago. It was being reported. And, what's that? In the realm of Jupiter, a lot of Jupiter's atmosphere is methane. So, and that's because there's a lot of methane in that region of the solar system. When the sun, when the proton wind, the solar wind comes out from the sun, it sweeps material out, and the bigger dust particles, etc., get swept out, and that's what you see in the Kuiper Belt, forming planets, the discharge of the solar capacitor out there. And then the smaller, lighter elements are, it's kind of like a centrifuge. You know what a centrifuge is. You take a blood sample, put it in a centrifuge, and you spin it, and the denser material goes towards the bottom, the less dense next, the next dense next, etc., until the very lighter, the least dense materials are at the very top of the test tube when you spin it. And so it's a similar process, although it's not a centrifugal force, not a centrifuge. But what happens when the solar wind blows out, the heaviest materials and the densest are next to the sun, like iron. That's where the zodiacal disk comes from, around the sun, mainly iron. And then as you go out farther and farther in the solar system, the bigger dust particles are farther out. And so you'll see a lot of the ammonias and molecular species like that out around Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Okay, so that's another aspect of comets. Just a quick mention. There's still a sale on the water filters, jmccwaterfilters.com. Go there, and the whole house water filters are actually at half price right now till we had some expenses, some things to accomplish. And so putting on a sale helps to generate a little revenue, that's all. And so you can still take part in that until Sunday night. And so the typical price, it's called the best deal. It's the stainless steel whole house water filter, 5 big 20-inch elements, filter elements, and it's a 2-stage filter. It's a physical filter, and the second filter is this all-in-one, but the second stage is a medium which removes chemicals that are in solution in water, and then it comes also with the final filter, which is an ultraviolet 36-inch tube, 55 watt, that zaps anything that might be living, viruses, organisms, whatever that could possibly get through the filter system would be killed in this final UV sterilizer. So that's the system, and typically $1,480, now on sale for $740, includes shipping to the 50 states. If it's too much, if we ship to Alaska or Hawaii, then we share some of that expense, not all of it, but some of it, with the people from those beautiful places remote. But to the 48 states, free shipping. And then I also have the filter elements for the gravity water filters, and those are on sale also. Once again, the webpage, jmccwaterfilters.com. And I'm out of time, so we'll talk to you next week.
This has been Master of Science with host James McCanny. Join us each week as James will delve into historical figures such as Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and the great mathematicians as we explore the history of man, Earth, and our universe as you've never seen it before. Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern,